So today I want to talk about homelessness, the right to housing, and the pandemic. In New York City, residents who were provided housing and refuge in hotels during the early parts of the pandemic are now being forcibly removed from their current housing situations, where the only option besides ending up back on the street is for people to move back into congregate shelters. In order to talk about the details of this, I'd like to start off with a clip from New York City's CBS 2 News, where they talk about the situation at the Lucerne Hotel in Manhattan. So let's take a look at this clip.
Lucerne, the hotel that housed homeless people during the pandemic on the Upper West Side, it even led to a fight in court. Welcome back here at 5:30. I'm Maurice Dubois.
And I'm Alice Gaynor. A group of homeless men have been living at the Lucerne since last summer as part of an effort to keep them safe during the pandemic.
But with the city reopening, they're being told they have to return to shelters now. CBS 2's Kevin Rincon has the story.
It felt like an eviction as these men grabbed their belongings and walked out of the hotel for one last time.
That's because it was an eviction. These people were being forcibly removed with no other place to really go except for a shelter. And when you learn more throughout, as we talk about this, about the conditions of the shelter, I don't blame them for being upset. This is quite an eviction.
You know, the choice. What else am I wish they would leave us right here just until my housing come through.
At the height.
There's no other choice. I wish they would just leave me alone until the housing comes through. How frustrating is that? How horrific is that for someone to be that close to being able to get housing or being on the verge of getting some sort of housing access that's permanent, and then being forcibly removed from a hotel room into a congregate shelter? That has to be a terrible experience to be going through. And yet this is the policy that New York City is enforcing by kicking people out of this hotel.
Of the pandemic, there were more than 200 homeless men inside. Today, the remaining 68 were taken to congregate shelters throughout the city. Delcinia Glover is with the Public Advocate's office. She had hoped the city would hold off until these men could find a more permanent solution.
Why is this the first thing we do when the city opens up and not the last thing we do to protect these people?
The city's Department of Homeless Services says now that the health indicators are headed in the right direction, they're phasing out this temporary program and returning to shelters, anticipating completing this process by the end of July. As this bus pulls away, these homeless men are going to be taken to shelters throughout the city, calling this place home no more.
Miserable, man. It's like we're going backwards after we got ahead. It's just sad, man. It's just sad the way this played out.
There were legal efforts by some neighbors to get these men out, citing concerns over safety, challenges that were blocked in court. Today's move is solely based on the progress made against COVID.
I just hope that they're doing the right thing and giving them a better start. I have no problem with them being here in the first place.
These neighbors say despite initial concerns, things did improve.
If you have enough support for people, they can be very good neighbors. And I'm sorry they're moving out.
As for the men, many were thankful for just getting the chance to be here.
They helped me get back on my feet, so I appreciate them. They renewed my life.
Advocates say it could take years for everyone here to find permanent housing, citing delays in the process. On the Upper West Side, Kevin Rincon, CBS 2 News.
So when we look at all of that and we talk about that kind of an issue where people are literally being kicked out of their home, one of the things that that particular clip didn't show off that the article involved did is Freeman, one of the men involved, said, "Jail, jail, period, it's jail. I'm heading to jail today." That is the expression that this person had in response to being sent to a shelter. And when we look at the question that was presented by Delcinia Glover, from the Public Advocate's office, why is this the first thing that we're doing? It's a really important question to ask. And to answer that, I actually want to go into a different article presented by the city.nyc. A city starts kicking thousands of homeless people from hotels back to shelters. For thousands of homeless New Yorkers, a life-changing silver lining of the pandemic is coming rapidly to a close. They will no longer live in city hotels. In the span of about 6 weeks, the Department of Homeless Services will empty more than 60 commercial hotels used during the COVID-19 crisis as emergency housing for about 9,000 people. You get comfortable in one place, then you're somewhere else. You've got to readapt, said Mike Roberts, who was forced on Monday to move from an Upper West Side hotel to Kenton Hall, a men's shelter in the Bowery. It's very depressing. And here's where things really are frustrating. This means that more than 1,000 people each week are being sent back to dorm-style shelters, also known as congregate shelters, where residents sleep multiple people in a room. Meanwhile, it's unclear how many of the city's homeless people have been vaccinated. Now, if we look at the reasoning that people were put into hotels in the first place, it was to supposedly for their safety and so that people were safe during the pandemic. Now, the question, of course, now becomes which people, because it clearly wasn't about the people who did not have homes. Because with the Delta variant spreading and possibly being a major issue in the months to come, where the World Health Organization is mandating mask usage, while the CDC is kind of fumbling on that, the congregate shelters, where you might have multiple people sleeping in a room, and we don't necessarily know how vaccinated some of these populations and residents are, then we are setting up conditions for them to possibly get COVID and possibly spread it even further and put more strain on the system. Now, living at a hotel has allowed Roberts, the person mentioned before, to focus on recovery from drug use, join a local job program, and get his paperwork together to apply for permanent housing. And see, this is a thing, right? Whenever we provide actual solutions to people to give them a space where they are safe, able to work on themselves, where medical care is provided, and everything else that a person generally needs to feel safe and secure is available, then people are able to improve their conditions. They're able to work on themselves in ways that make their lives a little bit better. And unfortunately, that's part of the issue when we were looking at this situation from the CBS perspective that really needs to be taken into account. When you have thousands of people being taken from these shelters in the first place and then being thrown into these hotels, people finally get used to the hotels, and then they're being evicted. And there were, in some way, shape, or form, police presence there. We saw that in the video. People are saying, well, I have no choice. Where's my permanent solution? Where's my permanent options? I was making headway. I was fixing things. I was making my life better. And then we're back right to the drawing board. And for one person to declare that it looks and feels like jail is an absolutely horrific thing to be sending someone back to. And when we look at this, Mayor Bill de Blasio has said that repeatedly the hotel shelters were meant as a temporary fix, but that hasn't made a huge lifestyle shift any easier for the people whom just having a private room and a shower have been a transformation. And that's something that I think is largely ignored. Having the ability to have access to a private room where you can shut the door, where you can close the door, where you can be by yourself, where you can be in your own head, that, sense of something private, to be able to take a shower without having to worry about anything. Those are things that a lot of people take for granted. And for over a year, a lot of the people in these hotel shelters were given this ability to do that. And now we're going to send them back into places where they might have 20 somewhat people in a dorm room living together and trying to, sort out a situation like that. And never mind the fact that communities were formed in this building. Some of the neighbors, as you saw, even though they were originally opposed to it, had actually been quite comfortable with the people being there and probably developed relationships. The people in the building probably developed relationships with other people in the building. And now you're bringing them not just to shelters, but to separate shelters away from each other. And that means that by spreading them out, you are essentially breaking up the small amount of communities, resources, and care that they have developed for one another, which is another mental health factor in all of this. It's a sense of loss and a sense of grief. And that's something not being taken into consideration at all. People will be in the process of doing stuff and about to reach the goal, and they're just within reach, and all of a sudden, transfer. And you've got to deal with a whole new set of people you don't even know, Robert said. And that's really the truth of the matter, right? When you're developing a community and some group that you can work with, and then you're thrust into a new situation where you have to figure everything out from the beginning, it really is a difficult process to go through, in addition to the terrible conditions, in addition to not having privacy, in addition to not having a shower necessarily. It adds to the stress of everything else. And if somebody's working to get themselves back on their feet and they have to have no community to do it, that's going to make it that much harder. On the ground, members of the group Open Hearts actually wrote messages in color chalk. Housing is a human right. Love thy neighbor, advised another. And that's really where I want to go with this. Housing is supposed to be a human right. Housing is something that we rely on. And we rely on it not just for things like property value, like a lot of articles recently have talked about, but we rely on it for the social factors involved. We rely on it for the community around us. We rely on it for a sense of safety and privacy and the ability to feel comfortable in our own space. These hotel rooms provided a semblance of that for a lot of people for a year, and they were able to work on themselves because of that. And again, when we come back to that, one of the things that I think really does go ignored is how a lot of people are losing community. Who knows how long I'm going to be there? I've got a housing package, said this man Humphrey, referring to the approvals necessary to secure subsidized housing, but I still don't have no housing. And that's the thing, right? In a lot of these circumstances, they're promised housing, they're promised packages, oh, you'll get the subsidized housing soon, but then it gets delayed, it gets pushed to the side, and people fall through the cracks in the system. And as more and more forms of public housing in a place like New York City are probably becoming more privatized because of the incentive to turn things into condos through gentrification processes and to turn them into co-ops through and the type of co-ops that are very expensive through these programs to privatize these housing situations, you're going to end up with more cases where people get on a list for subsidized housing and they end up getting pushed further and further down that list, not able to actually get the resources they ask for. And the CBS clip had actually stated that some people might take years to actually get into a proper housing situation, which means that they have plenty of years to fall through the cracks, when we should really be providing at least the basic needs. And I know that the hotels really aren't a permanent solution for a lot of people. Paying for the hotel rooms is a costly endeavor. That doesn't mean that you can't set up affordable housing and start to expedite that, that you can't start building apartment buildings with that in mind, that you can't start building some sort of thing that isn't cramming people into small dormitories and actually give people a space where they can have a bit of human decency and dignity. Opponents to the push people to the out of the free hotel rooms blamed racism and pervasive not in my backyard or NIMBY sentiment. And this is another factor as I read through this that I'm going to really want to touch on. The pattern of moves is very clear, said Helen Strom, a legal advocate with Safety Net Project, an advocacy group for homeless and low-income New Yorkers. The city's starting with almost exclusively Manhattan hotels, primarily in Midtown in white, wealthy areas. Advocates have also previously pointed out that the federal government had said that it would pay for hotel rooms through September. Those payments, however, do not cover services or staff for the shelters. So there's a major program failure on the federal government's part, where the payments that go through September don't actually cover all the way through September because it doesn't cover staff and other services. And instead of the city picking it up and following through, you end up with situations where they end the program in July, 2 months early, or 2 to 3 months early, so that people really who might have been relying on the extra few months to get their housing situation in order are now being kicked out. And we're starting, of course, in Midtown Manhattan in primarily white neighborhoods. So why would that be the case? Well, the city does not value human beings unless they have money or status or political influence, said the deputy public advocate Delacenia Glover, and a longtime housing rights activist. The NIMBYism wins. And this is a frustrating component of things because a huge part of this is racial. Not only that, but it's also class-based. And those two factors are coming in very strong and very hard in this situation. Out of all the areas, out of all the things that could have been targeted to open up first during the pandemic, you remove people from the hotels first. And you specifically target white, wealthy neighborhoods as the areas to get homeless people out. Homeless people, which, as you saw, have a higher percentage of being people of color. So you really are adhering to a form of racism under the guise of it being a neutral idea where it's just based on the idea that people need to start moving back to the shelters and that's going to be somehow good for people. No, we knew this was a racist issue from the beginning because the people, and part of this NIMBYism, because at the end of the day, people really were fighting this. There were court cases going on against people being moved into these hotels. And it was probably really based on the ideas of property values. And that is disturbing and that is sick that we're worried about values of property over human lives. When we go through this a little bit further and just wrap up this article, once you get them in shelters, you find them living 20 people in the dorm room, a person talking all night because he's crazy, and people might be getting high. You don't want to live like that, he added. This is the same person, Roberts, that we were talking about before. Strom had heard the same from many clients and more than a dozen shelters who got used to having, among other things, basic privacy, personal space, and the ability to shut a door. Again, I can't emphasize how these are things that most people take for granted. To have some semblance of personal space, to be able to shut a door, that is something that can be really important, especially when working on your mental health. And to be crammed in a room with 20 people who are getting high, who are, as Roberts put it, crazy, which means an unidentified mental health issue that needs to be addressed, we decide that we're just going to throw people in mass into these dorm spaces instead of providing mental health services, instead of providing any sort of drug relief programs, instead of providing people who do not want or cannot be around drugs for a lot of different reasons, access to spaces where they are not there. If you're someone who does not want to be around that and you're being put in a space where that's around you all the time, that can lead to a lot of frustrating outcomes. And to make matters worse, and to just prove that this has never been about homeless people and has just been about people who want to feel comfortable not having to see homeless people or not having to worry about homeless people spreading the coronavirus during the earliest parts of it, the Homeless Service Agency does not track the vaccination rates among its shelter populations. Data suggests it's likely that homeless New Yorkers have been vaccinated at a much lower rate than the general public. And this just adds to it. With the Delta variant spreading and now you're throwing people 20 at a time into dorm rooms, you're going to find that people are going to end up getting the virus in much larger amounts. They're going to end up in the hospital in places where they can't afford the bills anyway. And it's just going to end up being that everyone else who got vaccinated, who has housing, you know what? They're fine. So forget everybody else. That's really the attitude I feel like the city is taking with us. And if the Delta variant does end up being as contagious as we think, and any of these variants end up getting past the vaccine and end up starting to spread in mass without the vaccine stopping it, or the vaccine starts wearing off, or any of the other possibilities during the course of this pandemic that can go wrong, then we are going to be in a place where all of this ends up being for nothing. And we're going to end up having to throw people back into hotels just to solve it instead of finding people permanent housing. Now, there are two other locations that I want to very, very briefly go over and how they are dealing with it. And just, even though these are problematic in their own ways, at least it's something more than just throwing people in a shelter with 20 people. So Denver, actually, of all places, is in a process of trying to buy up some of the hotels and motels for unhoused residents so that they can stay there in a temporary shelter until a permanent solution can be found. And I think that would be a much better option, especially for a place like New York City as well. However, it still needs to be noted that Denver is trying to break down unsanctioned campsites and is still planning to launch civilian enforcement teams to clear them, as well as possibly move people out of those unsanctioned campsites into sanctioned campsites, which will again do the same thing of breaking up communities. But at the very least, for the people who would have the ability to stay in a hotel or motel, buying up the properties would in fact create some sort of temporary housing situation until more permanent ones could be developed and created. And I know Denver has a plan that's being worked on to improve infrastructure across the board, so maybe part of the construction that they can work on could involve building affordable housing for people. And while there seems to be some pushback here, and this does seem to be a much better option than what New York is doing. And for Sacramento and the state of California, they're establishing a right to housing mandate, which has long been sought after by progressives who argue that public funding and compassion are wasted without the power of the law to force cities to supply adequate housing. At the same time, state and local governments have been leery about the financial implications of slinging out housing as a legal right. Yet the financial implications being that landlords might not be able to maintain their monopoly over housing, that people would actually be allowed to live in a home, and that it would question a lot of the system of capitalism. That's what they're really worried about. But housing advocates have also expressed concerns that this law might be used to intensify police crackdowns, potentially giving cities free legal rein to sweep encampments of homeless people as long as they offer them some sort of shelter. The right to housing is based on inherent dignity of the individual, so a straightforward obligation to accept whatever conditions is offered undermines that. This person, Eric Tars, the legal director of National Homelessness Law Center in Washington, D.C., said. The right to housing is an important concept. And this really is something to consider. Now, there are claims that this is going to actually be different from the right to shelter process that's in New York City, where you're going to have 20 people there, but we don't know how this is going to manifest. The truth of the matter is, while I do appreciate that Denver and Sacramento are attempting to do better than New York City here in terms of buying some of the hotels or trying to move in the direction of actually providing an alternative. And there are other cities out there buying hotels as well, which I couldn't cover through the whole extent of that in this one video. The underlying motive on all of these seems to be that they want to get people who are considered homeless to be out of the sight of people who do have homes. That seems to be the underlying motive in all of these cases, with no guarantees that anybody's going to be able to maintain any of the communities that they formed. Whether it's in the pandemic relief hotels in New York City or the places of refuge found in Denver or parts of California, people do deserve to have access to things like a shower, a little bit of privacy every now and then, not being crammed in a space with 20 other people, and to maintain some of the communities that they formed without being thrown from one group into another and having to figure everything out from scratch. These communities that have been formed should not be just broken up like they're nothing. They are social nets of safety for our mental health and for ourselves, and they do not deserve to be, as people, bounced from home to home, from community to community, just to make wealthy people feel better. At the end of the day, I just don't understand at this point how we cannot see the society and social value in people having a right to housing with a decent standard of living. I don't understand how we can value policing over medical services for people who need it. And I don't understand how a place like New York City is just throwing people into shelters with poor conditions when people have had access to literally hotel rooms for the past year with a shower, a door, and with all of the things that have provided some level of basic dignity and have literally been the silver lining for a lot of people during the pandemic. And we're still in that pandemic, right? We still need to remember that. And with the Delta variant and everything else, there's a lot of things to consider about whether or not people's lives are even being valued. The solution is to consistently push human beings to the side instead of providing the social means, the structural means for people to get out of their situations. And there's so many more things that places could be doing, including providing shelter, providing mental health services, providing any sort of skill training. And a true right to housing is really where we need to end up. One that entails and provides people with the basic sense of community, the basic necessities of life, and isn't just being shoehorned to get cops to be able to throw people into whatever the state decides to give them, whether that be the right to shelter in New York or whether that be the right to housing in Sacramento. In either case, there needs to be a movement towards a true right of housing where people can maintain and have the dignity of having community, shelter, and all of the factors that come into a home, and not just the ones the state deems necessary for the basic needs of maintaining some sort of semblance of order for wealthy people. That would be a true great start to this process. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and bell for notifications. You can follow me and check out my Twitter and my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.